What happens when our most fundamental tools for understanding reality break? When logic itself stops working? The greatest minds in quantum physics say we've reached exactly that point, and that raises a fascinating question. If our finest scientists admit that their discoveries transcend reason at the quantum level, why do so many new atheists still believe that their logic can police the limits of reality?
You know, it's like top trumps. They mustn't pick logic on their cards.
I'm no scientist, but the people who are, the quantum physics crowd, lobbed a spanner the size of the Hadron Collider into the materialistic machine. Their discoveries are reality-bending, logic-defying and flat-out weird. So weird, in fact, that the experts themselves keep offering similar warnings. And this isn't forced modesty. At the quantum level, particles exist in multiple places simultaneously. They communicate instantly over vast distances. They behave differently when observed. None of this makes sense to our everyday experience. Physicist Phil Ball sums it up with how our language is built around the logic we know, but that logic simply won't work for quantum mechanics. Now imagine travelling to the quantum realm, witnessing impossible events, then being asked to describe them, but using only everyday language. It would be like trying to explain green to somebody blind from birth. Now picture that blind friend lecturing you on the experience of sight. Absurd, right? Yet that's exactly what happens when staunch materialists attempt to dismiss direct spiritual experiences. Now, centuries before quantum laboratories even existed, yogis, mystics and spiritual seekers reported the same language failure when attempting to describe transcendent experiences. Today, modern medicine echoes the same accounts through thousands of near-death experiences, patients who flatlined only to later recount verifiable events, divine encounters and journeys to spiritual realms they describe as beyond logic, intellect and reason. Psychiatrist Bruce Grayson's 40-year research program has catalogued more than 1,000 such cases, concluding that the standard physiological theories fail to explain NDEs and they challenge current mind-brain models. Dr. Sampania, director of the AWARE study, offers a purely objective assessment of their own research.
The explanations that were put forward in the 70s and 80s were that this is probably just simply lack of oxygen, a change in carbon dioxide level, and I think those are now antiquated with what we understand. So what does happen to their consciousness? And the evidence we have so far, and it's an emerging field, is that when a person has technically died, their brain flatlines, and no human experience should be happening at that time whatsoever. Paradoxically, 10 to 20% of people do come back and they report these incredible experiences. There is enough anecdotal evidence and there are enough cases that have occurred that suggests that consciousness may continue when brain function has ceased.
So, what's a new atheist to do? Well, their approach appears to be straightforward. Continue claiming the metaphysical doesn't exist with the same ferocity they demand evidence from everyone else.
We might be wrong. We're 99% sure.
The likelihood is about 1% or less.
Evidence offered to support such a claim of certainty? Exactly less than 1%. So, what does all this mean? Well, without evidence to support the skeptics' claimed level of certitude, their self-proclaimed weapons of choice seem to be logic and rational thinking. Yet, as already demonstrated, when attempting to comprehend realms beyond our sense-based perceptions, quantum physics has demonstrated the limitation of those tools. And this leaves the new atheist, well, blind, actually. It leaves them floundering like fish on dry land, grasping for dismissive rational explanations when none can be found. Let me demonstrate. On page 154 of his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Daniel Dennett meets the beyond logic claim by arguing that cod could then be a ham sandwich wrapped in foil. But notice the move. Experiencers report above logic, Dennett silently swaps that for beneath logic, inverts a luncheon meat deity, slaps mustard on it and declares victory through a textbook straw man fallacy. Curiously, however, I doubt he's ever stormed into a quantum lab yelling, so if the quantum world is beyond our logic, then the wave function could also be deli meat, couldn't it? Now, Professor Richard Dawkins pushes harder than Dennett. Instead of attacking the concept, in his book The God Delusion, he tries to discredit the experiences themselves. He writes, "The argument for personal experiences is one that is most convincing to those who claim to have had one, but is the least convincing to everybody else." And his reasoning? Well, he argues there is insufficient evidence for a supernatural claim. Therefore, natural explanations are the more probable. And he concludes, because some hallucinations exist, all spiritual perceptions must therefore be hallucinations. And yet, he offers no data, no research, just asylum anecdotes and a pink elephant quip, to then make hasty leaps of faith no first-year methods class would tolerate. However, the reader is also expected not to notice that his position conveniently ignores well-documented NDE cases where clinically brain-dead patients actually report verified events, evidence that, as early confirmed by Dr. Grayson, defies conventional neurological explanation. Now, surely, by selectively addressing only the weakest examples while ignoring the strongest evidence, Dawkins demonstrates the very confirmation bias he critiques in theists. Now, the validity of his arguments, or lack thereof, is easily demonstrated through his claims that these experiences are least convincing to everybody else, which is demonstrably false. For example, the book Heaven is for Real, based on direct NDE testimony, has sold over 10 million copies to Dawkins' book, which has only sold 3 million. And with NDEs in mind, let's turn to one of Dawkins' fellow new atheist horsemen, Sam Harris, as he takes a more specific swing at discrediting the possible reality of near-death experiences themselves. In a 2012 essay, Harris suggests that we should be troubled by the fact that only 10 to 20% of people who come close to death recall anything at all. But those doing the science, well, they don't seem troubled at all. The AWARE study, undertaken 4 years before Harris's essay, pointed out that many more people may have had vivid near-death experiences, but don't recall them due to sedation or brain trauma affecting the memory. And also, are we then to believe that the phenomenon of dreaming isn't real, simply because most of us have no recollection of them in the morning? Then Harris raises another objection. Even when people report verified events during flatlining, he argues there's no way to prove these memories occurred while the brain was inactive. And yet, the AWARE study documents cases that have already answered such objections.
And they report these incredible experiences.
How do we know that they're not recalling these experiences as they're coming back to consciousness, as they're coming out of the coma?
Well, that's a very good question. But there are cases which don't support that, including what we found in our research, where essentially you can time the person's experience. You can see, they will tell you exactly what was happening to them 15 or 20 minutes into their cardiac arrest, rather than just the beginning or just the end where the brain function was coming back online again. So,
as with Dawkins, we now apparently have a neuroscientist warning others about cognitive bias, then selects anecdotes that support his view while seemingly ignoring the data that doesn't. He also points to cultural variations. If NDEs really reflect a non-physical reality, he asks, shouldn't the reports be more uniform? But what's his expectations of uniformity based on? Harris never explains. It seems he simply assumes that rules based on his understanding must apply to whatever lies beyond it. But nonetheless, let's answer his concerns with a purely speculative idea. Most of us fear death, whether because of the unknown, annihilation, or inherited images of judgment and hell. Now imagine, to ease what could otherwise be a hugely traumatic event, a supreme consciousness, like a skilled therapist tailoring the session to each client, guides us through that moment of terror in a way that is deeply personal, comforting, and suited to our own individual psyche. How can Harris be sure that isn't what's happening? Obviously he can't. And yet he declares, one certainly wouldn't expect the after-death state of South Indians to diverge from that of North Indians, as has been reported. Well, isn't it true that physicists once wouldn't have expected particles to exist simultaneously in multiple places or communicate instantly across vast distances? Clearly then, what we expect isn't a reliable guide at the boundaries of our understanding. So it would appear, like many new atheists, Harris seems surprisingly confident about what we should expect to find in non-physical realms he doesn't even believe in. Look, spiritual teachers and experiences say the metaphysical exists beyond our human logic and understanding. When approaching reality's edge, physicists confirm this concept. Skeptics then respond with a supposed certitude suggesting such realms have less than a 1% probability of being real. And to support such certitude, if Dawkins and co. held the same level of hard data they expect from others, they would be shouting it from the rooftops. And yet their critiques consist of ham sandwich fallacies, unevidenced bravado, and speculative explanations about realms they simultaneously claim don't exist.
The likelihood is about 1% or less.
A critical argument.
They mustn't ever engage in logic.
Try to come to a rational judgment.
And yet these are the exact tools that quantum physics has confirmed foul at the edge of our known reality. So how can the new atheist use them to insist what can and cannot exist beyond it? Short answer, they can't. It's our blind friend who insists he'll school the sighted on vision. So, what remains for the new atheist? Surely such swaggering certainty can only remain through the rather delusionally arrogant defence of nothing can exist beyond my understanding. And armed with such omniscience, will we now be asked to believe when God made man in his own image, he pictured a middle-aged Oxford lecturer yelling non-existence to the heavens? Anyway, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share and comment below. And please subscribe to help the channel progress. But overall, thanks for watching. And so until the next time, remember to hold your beliefs lightly and stay open. Bye-bye for now.